When you get started on this exercise, you should have downloaded the Rock Canyon Animate file, and when you open it up in Adobe Animate, here's how I've got it set up. If you're following along with the book, the first set of instructions would have you already draw off this canyon-like structure and fill it in with gray. I've already given you that as your background, and so that's what the rock wall layer will give you. Also, once you zoom out, look at the top of your artboard. I've already set up a ball for you to work on. What we want to be able to do is to create two separate animations. The first animation will be a simple straight ahead style of animation. We're going to draw off a reference for the ball to have it bounce all down through the canyon. In the second half of this exercise, we're going to do a post-to-post animation, doing essentially the same thing, having the ball drop and bounce all through the canyon. The purpose of this exercise is to give you an experience of what it takes to map out and plan ahead an entire animation. And there's two different ways of doing it, through the straight ahead and post-to-post method. Now the first thing we need to do is to establish a reference layer to use as a drawing guide for the path that our ball will fall on. So going down to our timeline, I'm going to create a new layer above the rock wall. So select the rock wall, create a new layer. We're going to call this the ball reference layer. Also from here, you're going to be doing this exercise essentially twice. So I'm going to save two different versions of this particular file. I'll go up to File, and let's go ahead and save the Rock Canyon version. And since this first one is going to be a straight ahead, I'm going to do a save as. Let's add our name to this. And I'm going to call this the straight ahead, SA abbreviation for this file type. We'll say save. Now let's set up our straight ahead animation. Do make sure that the first frame is selected, and you can move your ball around to any starting point that you want, as long as it's outside of the starting of the stage. I'm going to have mine start over on this right-hand side. Now as we animate it, imagine the ball falling down into this canyon and bouncing from back and forth before finally reaching a stopping point at the very bottom. The only thing I'm going to require is that it have at least 4 different contact points with the canyon itself. So as it bounces, it'll go 1, 2, 3, and 4 or more as it reaches the bottom. But a minimum of 4 bounces is what I'm looking for. Now with my starting point established, I'm going to go down to my timeline. I'm going to lock down my ball layer just so I can select my ball reference layer and make sure that I'm working just within this particular layer and not affecting the other ones as I work. Now the tool that I want you to use is going to be your pencil tool. The book recommends using the brush tool, and for other exercises that does have some advantages, but the pencil tool for this exercise has a unique advantage found in its mode you can draw in. If you go over to the Properties panel, make sure Object Drawing Mode is unchecked and not highlighted, and make sure the Object Drawing Mode is set to Straighten. With Straighten selected, you can draw kind of a quick sloppy circle, and when you let go, it gives you a near perfect circle. If I undo this, if you were to draw in some other modes like Smooth, you can still draw kind of a sloppy circle and it will smooth it out, but it won't be as perfect as with Straighten mode. So I'm going to set my mode to Straighten. Change your color of your stroke to be kind of a mid-tone of blue, something that'll just show up nice and easily in contrast with all the colors that are here. And you can set your stroke size to be somewhere between 5 and 10 points. You can also change your width profile from a normal to that first width profile 1 to give it more of a sketchy look if you want. And really this isn't necessary. I just like to use it to distinguish between my other drawings. Now I'm going to hit Command and the plus sign and zoom in and then move over. By the way, I'm holding down my space bar to give me the little hand to move over to where my ball is. As we move along our timeline, we're going to be drawing off this ball over and over again as it animates through the sequence. So as I draw, I'm going to be thinking about those principles of easing in and out as it falls. As it falls, it should be stretching out, so I'm doing some squashing and stretching. And as it rebounds and bounces, it should be arcing from one area to the other. So to get started, since I'm on frame 1, I'm going to start by drawing this ball and have it easing in to a fall. So my first drawing of the ball will be right about here as its starting point. Now if the size is off by a little bit, that's okay. Remember, this is simply meant to be a reference for where your ball should be, but do try to keep it as close as possible to the original size of the ball. Next, when I go down to my timeline, here's the sequence that I'm going to be doing. I want to advance forward 2 frames. We're going to be animating on the 2s. So hit the period key on your keyboard once, twice to move forward, and we want to insert a blank keyframe. To do a blank keyframe, that's the F7 key on your keyboard. Notice that this will clear everything away, but it'll give you a keyframe that's nice and blank. Now when it does this, you're also going to lose the ball that you drew off. So we want to be able to see that and see our previous drawings. So also while we're down here, let's turn on onion skinning. With onion skinning enabled, you can pull the blue side of this back so that you can see it, and we can keep the green side just a little bit ahead since we don't even have anything drawn off. This will allow you to see the previous frame that's behind it. Now with that frame selected, let's draw our next one. It's going to be moving down just slightly, but a little bit more, and we'll draw off that circle. Again, going down to our timeline, you can advance forward twice by hitting the period, 1, 2, F7, insert a new blank keyframe. I'm going to extend my onion skin out just as I can see a little bit more. So now I can see all of these as it's falling. And this is the process that we're going to be repeating over and over again, but as it falls, it needs to be speeding up, and therefore it needs to be the spacing needs to be spaced out a bit more as well. So maybe I'll draw this one a little bit farther down. We'll advance forward 2 frames. 1, 2. New blank keyframe, F7. And let's draw again. This time a little bit farther down. Now as it falls, it should also be stretching out. So this one, I'm going to have it set to stretch. 1, 2, F7. And then on this one is where it's going to be making contact with the rock canyon. And so I'll have it squash down for this one. Now if I need to test my animation, I can always go down to my timeline and return my playhead back to the beginning, and I can hit return and I can see as it drops. What I would really like for it to do is to play this back over and over again just so I can see these few frames without actually having to stop it. To do that, I'm going to turn on looping by clicking on this icon. This will give us a set of brackets that are above our timeline. And if I click and drag these brackets, will allow it to play just between these 2 extremes. So as I hit return, you can see it loops back and forth, and this will give you an idea of what it will look like just within that area. For now, I'll turn off looping, and let's continue arcing and animating the rest of our ball. Now let's continue on with our animation. Again, going down to our timeline, hit the period key twice to advance forward 2 frames, and then hit F7 to insert a new blank keyframe. All right, now that it's made contact, let's continue on with the rebound. Going down to the timeline, again, advance forward 2 keyframes, hitting period twice, insert a blank keyframe, F7, and as this hits, it's going to rebound up and over. Now you can see as I drew this, it didn't give me the oval that I was really looking for. If this happens to you, feel free to choose the free transform tool. You can use the Q key and select that circle. Then you can rotate it, and in my case, I'm even going to stretch it and move it into position where I want to do. This way, you don't have to redraw it over and over again if it's not giving you the right kind of shape that you're looking for. I'm even going to stretch this out a little bit more. I'm just eyeballing it, and then from here I'll commit to that transformation by clicking away and deselecting it. So with that done, we'll move over 2 more frames, period, period. F7, give me a new blank keyframe. I'm going to have it arc up in this trajectory. Let's choose my pencil tool one more time. As it moves, I want it to move out and away. Now if it does draw and it's close enough, that's okay. Again, this is simply meant to be a reference, so I don't mind that that back end isn't as rounded. Advance 2 keyframes. Two keyframes, F7. Now as it reaches this top point, I want it to slow down and become more of a ball shape. Two keyframes, F7. We'll set it up to there, 2 keyframes. Now as it starts to fall, it'll pick up speed and hit wherever it hits down here. Again, I want this one to be stretched out a little bit more. So I'm going to use my free transform. I'm even going to rotate it in the direction that I want it to go. Advance forward 2 keyframes, F7. We'll have it be splat right there. Now that I've got an arc, let's go back and test our movie to see what it looks like. First, I can pull my onion skinning all the way back to the beginning, and I can even back out, and even though it's very, very faint, I can see the trajectory that I created for this animation. To test it out, I'll pull my onion skin back. Let's turn on looping. And again, set your boundary extremes to be the first and last keyframe. And when you hit return, you can see the ball bouncing into position. Now for the rest of this process, you're simply going to be repeating the same thing over and over again, advancing forward 2 keyframes, inserting that blank keyframe and drawing off the path for the ball. Remember, we want to have it bouncing in a natural way from one side to the other, making at least 4 contact points. And you can add whatever arcs and other motion that you feel is necessary to get it to come to the final resting place. Now as you can see, as I reach the end here, I can add on more frames, and I'm going to let my ball come to this final little resting spot right here at the very end. With this, I can back out, Z everything, and then let's set our looping to loop over the entire area. So when I test it, this is what my ball will look like. Now as I'm looking at this, if I see anything that needs to be adjusted, this is where I can go in and adjust the timing and placement of all of the different parts of the ball. Alright, I personally think everything looks really good, but if you do see a particular area that needs to have more time, let's say I wanted there to be more bouncing between this particular part of the jump, This is where you can go down into your timeline and simply insert more frames. So if I wanted more frameage or more time for this part, I can click this particular keyframe and then hit F5 and add on more frames to give myself a little bit more time within this particular arc. And so now it slows down a little bit more. Of course, if you need it to go faster, you can go down into your keyframes. Let's say I wanted this final part to end a little bit quicker, and you can remove keyframes. Select that frame and then hit Shift F5, and that will bring the frames inward just slightly, and it'll give the appearance that it's moving much, much quicker. So now when I go back to replay this, you can see it bounces, this goes slower, and then it quickly ends there at the very end. The final thing I'll say is your entire time doesn't have to fill up all the way to the 4-second mark. If you need, or if it takes less time, that's totally fine. And if you need to add more time, you can add on more frames at the end of it. Take as much time as you need and have it bounce back and forth once it's finally finished. Now, the whole purpose of this reference layer is to be used as a guide for where your ball needs to be placed, and also how it needs to be stretched out and reconformed. So since this is a reference layer, we don't want it to play for our final one. Let's go to this layer and right-click on it and turn this into a guide layer. This way it will not play for our final design, and it gives you the little icon from here. We can return to frame 1 for your ball, and let's have the ball match up for every frame along the way. I'm also going to go down and unlock my ball layer and lock down the ball reference layer. Now I can zoom into where my ball is at, and all I need to do is match the position of my ball with my reference layer that's below it. So for this first frame, we'll move it down into position. Then we can go to our timeline and advance forward 2 frames to the next keyframe on our reference. Hit F6 to make a new keyframe, then move back and put the ball into position here. Move forward another 2 frames, hit F6, insert a new one. Now I know as it falls, it's also going to be squashing and stretching. So this is where I may choose my free transform tool and start to do whatever transformation or distortion that I need. So we'll move forward 2 frames, hit F6, drop the ball down, squash it and stretch it up. Move forward 2 frames, hit F6. In this case, it'll give me the squashing point for this one. F6. Move it. In this case, I want to keep the same amount. And if yours is off by a little bit, that's okay. You can see how even my reference was off for this one. Hit F6. Now, as you move, one of the downsides to using straight ahead animation is that very often the size of whatever you're animating will become distorted. So to make sure it stays the same size and position relative to its original starting point, we also want to have your transform tool or your transform panel open and handy. So I'm going to go up to Window and open up my transform. And I know once it returns back to being a ball, it needs to be at 100% for both the height and the width. So for instance, as this is coming up, it really shouldn't be stretched out so much. It should really turn back into a nice round ball. So I'll set that back to be 100%, and that's where it should be for this one. This means I may need to go back 2 frames and readjust this ball so that it's not so stretched out with that. Now that's looking good. Now I can advance forward 2 more, hit my new keyframe, and keep on editing within this. Now as I'm working, you can see I'm taking it 1 frame at a time, but occasionally you'll see me open up my transform panel and reset my ball back to 100% just so I don't lose that original size and it doesn't get too distorted as I squash and stretch it. Now that I'm finished, let's go up to Control and test the movie and see what it looks like. Aha, I can see there's even a couple of places that I'm off by just a bit on those. But in general, the ball looks like it's bouncing pretty good, and I can see I need to go back and clean that up. So let's go and see if we can find where those frames started to mess up. In this case, it looks like I accidentally added or made a copy of this one. Unfortunately, that's going to be in everything that I have, so I need to go back to each of my individual keyframes. I'm going to turn off onion skinning for now just to get that out of the way, and I can clean up that particular part. Also at this time, if I see anything that needs to be readjusted, I can go through and clean that up as well. For instance, as I'm cleaning this up, I can see there's a major size discretion between this ball and this ball as it moves forward. You can see where I really changed that up. So this one, maybe I'll go back in it, open up my transform tool, and yeah, I can see where it's starting to get way off. We'll set this back to 100% for both the height and the width, and then we'll back up maybe 2 frames, and we'll readjust these as well, bringing that up just a little bit more, maybe 95 to 95% for both of those. Then back up to the next frame, making sure that all those look good as well. Let's go back up and test our movie. Going to Control and Test, and see what our final results look like from here. Much better. Now once you've finished up with this part, this is the first half of this exercise. We're simply doing a straight ahead animation. We can go up to File and Save. And for the next part, we're going to do a pose to pose animation. This will allow us to do the same thing, but it'll give us a little bit more control over exactly where everything is placed. So for now, I've got this one saved. We'll close it out, and let's jump in to do the pose to pose animation.